This really happened to me. And even now, when I pass the intersection of Detroit Avenue and Riverside in Lakewood, I feel the echo of it like a bruise. I'm not dressing it up. I'm telling you exactly what happened because the only way to measure a humiliation is to say it out loud. At my sister's Thanksgiving dinner in Westlake, under the chandelier that made the crystal leaves look like ice, my brother-in-law dangled a key fob over the turkey and asked, "Whose rust bucket marked up my new pavers?" The carving knife gleamed. Everyone was gathered in their best sweaters, and the smell of sage stuffing hugged the house. "Elena's antique Civic," he smirked, tapping his phone to mirror the driveway camera onto the wall TV so a dozen cousins could watch my 2006 Honda, spattered with salt and shame, nose crooked on his perfect semicircle of stone. Laughter swelled, my aunt included, my own sister included. And he said, "Next year, park that thing on the street. We're trying to keep values up in the neighborhood." If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I remember the weight of the serving spoon in my hand, the butter glossing the beans, how my fingers went numb as if I were the glass being tapped. In my sister Vanessa's foyer, I had already clocked all the upgrades Dominic bragged about: the Sub-Zero fridge, the West Elm chairs, the Restoration hardware console staging fake books with gilded edges. In the half bath, a little sign said, "Live, laugh, love," in scripted gold, as if it were a commandment. The driveway was new too, of course, a fan of beige pavers curving around to that hulking craftsman at the end of the cul-de-sac near Crocker Park, the kind of place that feels expensive even in silence. Dominic sold cars, pre-owned luxury, he corrected anyone who said used, at a dealership on Lorraine, where he'd perfected his shuffle of jackets and cufflinks and combed-back hair. He was the man who told the family he could put them in anything, and, by the way, put you down while he did it. I set the spoon down. "It doesn't leak," I said softly, and my voice disappeared under the scrape of chairs and the pop of a champagne cork. On the TV, the car's hood caught a square of winter sun. The paint on my Honda had peeled off in places, and I'd mummified the driver's visor in blue painter's tape because it refused to stay up. The windshield had a starburst chip. I wanted to tell everyone I kept it, because I loved it, because it was paid off, because the last 3 winters it had started when the fancy ones in my apartment lot coughed and died. But humiliation is never logical. It just walks right in with dirty shoes. "Maybe I'll set Elena up with a loaner," Dominic said, swinging the fob like a pendulum over the bird. "We can't have you pulling up like a DoorDash driver. We'll start you in a C-class, basic, cloth seats. See how you do." "A DoorDash driver would be an upgrade," one cousin murmured, and more laughter broke, quick and mean. Vanessa, my older sister with her blowout perfect and her nails almond and pale as shells, touched my arm with a sugary sympathy. "He's only teasing," she said, and angled her face toward Dominic as if I should see him the way she did. "A charming provider, a big personality who bulldozed for your benefit." It was what she had said when he told our mother that my job, office manager at a small law firm near the Cuyahoga County Justice Center, was glorified secretarial with a title to soothe your pride. I didn't have the energy to explain how the Honda had gotten me to work every weekday at 7:50 a.m., how the receptionist and I took turns buying coffee at Gypsy on Detroit Avenue, how I reviewed intake forms while the attorneys argued in court. I didn't tell them that on Tuesdays I drove straight from work to my night class at Tri-C, reading case law in the parking lot with the heater ticking. I didn't tell them that my engine light had been on for a year because the sensor was busted and I couldn't afford to fix it, but I used my phone's OBD scanner and checked for real issues weekly. Some humiliations you swallow because explaining them makes them bloom. "Say grace," my mother said, and everyone bowed like a chorus. Dominic cleared his throat and recited something pious and quick, a performative gratitude meant to land on the Instagram caption later. Amen. Plates passed. I kept a smile at the edges. My chest felt pried open by the joke that wouldn't leave the room. Later, when the football game arced across the TV and children chased each other through the great room, Dominic found me by the drinks cart and leaned on it like he'd leaned on a dozen sales desks. Listen, kid, he said, and I bristled at kid because I was 32. I can get you into something clean. It reflects on all of us, you know. Reflects, I said. People see family, he said. I'm trying to help. Then he lowered his voice. Also, that driveway camera picks everything up. You're leaking. I am not, I said, so quickly even I didn't believe it. He smiled a little. I'll do you a favor. A friend price. You keep it tidy, you show it off, you send me a couple referrals, I'll make you a sweetheart deal. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. That night, the cold was a knife while I waited for the Honda to defrost. My breath plumed the cabin. My hands felt the cheap plastic of the steering wheel cover I'd bought at AutoZone. When the engine turned over, loyal and rough, I told it, it's us against them. And the car, bless it, shivered like a dog and settled into a hum. On the way home along Clifton Boulevard, the lake was a dark slab, and the wind shoved the car sideways so I kept my palms light, correcting gently, the way my father had taught me when I learned to drive in a Walmart lot at dusk. He died when I was 21, a sudden collapsing of the world that left Vanessa chasing stability like a life raft and me clinging to small, meaningful things. The blue ceramic mug he'd liked, the downtown marathon shirt I slept in, the Honda with its boring nobility. Always leave something for yourself, he used to mutter, tightening the click on the gas cap. Don't apologize for it either. But humiliation gnawed. It wasn't even the joke. People with money find ways to be contemptuous, and you learn to thread needles around it. It was the intention underneath. Dominic had turned me into a prop in his theater. He performed prosperity at my expense. A week later, I stopped by a Heinen's in Rocky River after work to buy milk and bread, and a bouquet of cheap mums because I needed something living in the apartment besides me. I was sliding the key into the Honda's door when a man in a puffer jacket stalked past his own car and said, to no one, I should have known. He was on the phone, voice sharp. A damn paper tag for 3 months? He said the title was coming from Columbus. Then the check engine light comes on. I go to a guy on Hilliard and he shows me the VIN doesn't match the door sticker. I'm calling the Attorney General. I don't care. I wasn't nosy by nature, but it snagged in me. Paper tag, title from Columbus, VIN mismatch. Those were phrases I knew too well from the firm. Consumer protection cases drifting across my desk, the way our attorney Mariah would purse her mouth and say, we can try, but the law is Swiss cheese. I watched the man jab his hands as he talked, and when he ended the call, I heard myself say lightly, I work at a law office, not for the AG, but you okay? He blinked at me, anger dissolving into the relief of being seen. Bought a clean Audi A6, he said. 2 months later, I'm finding Bondo under the paint and a bent frame a blind bat could diagnose. Where? I asked. He swiped at his nose. West Side Luxury on Lorraine. The guy ran the numbers like he was doing me a favor. There are moments when you feel the universe set a piece on the board. It's not thunder or a spotlight, just a quiet realignment. I felt it then, the click. Did you get a Carfax? I asked. Of course, he said bitterly. They printed it for me. Showed one owner, no accidents, clean as a baptism. I gave him my card, the basic white one with my name and the firm number, and said, if you email a copy of your paperwork, I'll ask our attorney if there's anything worth doing. No promises. I can't give legal advice. He tucked the card into his wallet like it was a raffle ticket, and he was letting himself believe. Thanks, he said. I'm Greg. That night, his email landed in our general inbox. And I forwarded it to Mariah with a note. He says the VIN on the door sticker doesn't match the dash. We'd seen that before. Flood cars shipped in, sloppily stitched together with different panels, the paper tags rotating like musical chairs so they never had to register. Sometimes the titles did come from Columbus, but not for noble reasons. Title washing through friendly counties, mileage, discrepancies, rubbed smooth. Mariah knocked on my door the next morning, coffee in hand. You know this store? She asked. Everyone knows it, I said. They sponsor a Little League team. The mascot has a gold bow tie. She sighed. He signed as is, which is always a problem. But the VIN thing is big. That's fraud if true. Did you see pictures? Greg had sent them. I opened the folder. The dash VIN like a crisp tattoo, the door sticker like a bad forgery, the rivets scratched like someone pried at them in a hurry. I felt a surprising heat in my throat, as if the images insulted me personally. Maybe they did. I could see Dominic's smirk in the scratches. We invited Greg to the office. He came in wearing the same jacket and a righteous determination that softened around Mariah's calm. In the conference room, he laid out his documents on the faux mahogany table. The purchase agreement, the paper tag renewals, the Carfax printout with the neat little check marks, the sheet from the mechanic on Hilliard. Mariah pointed to the arbitration clause and grimaced. They force you out of court into a private room where they stall, she said. But fraud can sometimes get around it. Greg tapped the dealer's name with one finger. They told me I'd be better off calling Dominic directly, said he'd make it right. The name sat there like a thumbprint. I swallowed. Dominic? I asked, feigning casual. General manager, Greg said. Slick hair, talks a mile a minute. He paused. You know him? I forced my lips up. He's married to my sister. The room tilted, just enough to throw off balance. Mariah's eyes flicked to mine and then back to the documents as if to say, slow down, we'll handle this cleanly. She took Greg's case. She sent a demand letter. The reply came from a lawyer I recognized as the kind who sprinkled Latin in emails to sound expensive. He said there was no fraud. Greg had signed as is. The title was delayed by Columbus backlog. They were working with the customer. In other words, go away. At night, I lay awake with the Honda's windshield clicking in the cold, and I found myself replaying Dominic's Thanksgiving words, the way he'd made an entire room complicit in how small he wanted me to feel. A thought grew, the kind that makes you bolt upright. If Greg's VIN was wrong and his Carfax clean, how many others? How many clean cars floating through the west side with history scrubbed and odometers shaved down to numbers that flattered? Cleveland in... Winter is a test of endurance, and you survive it by building rituals. The same coffee shop, the same scarf looped twice, the same right turn into work. I added a new ritual. I started stopping at the BMV deputy registrar on Clifton on my lunch break, bringing a candy cane for the clerk 2 weeks early. Public records request, I'd say, trying to sound like anyone but Vanessa's kid sister. I learned to pull title histories, to read the strange poetry of transactions, Ohio to Pennsylvania to Ohio again, salvage to rebuilt to clean. 1 VIN turned into 3, 3 into 9. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was following threads anyone could follow if they had the patience and the appetite to stare down boredom. Then I did something a little less saintly. Ohio is a one-party consent state for recording phone calls. I read it twice, then a third time. I let the words settle. One afternoon, with my phone on the desk and a cheap recorder app open, I dialed the dealership and asked for Dominic. The receptionist, syrupy and brittle at once, put me on hold to the sound of elevator jazz that had learned to wear a suit. Dominic, he said finally, voice as smooth as showroom lights on waxed paint. Hi, I said, pitching my voice in the register of a woman who'd been told she was lucky to be on the line at all. I'm calling about a late title. A friend of mine bought an Audi A6 and... He cut me off with soft authority. We're working with everyone affected. Columbus is backed up. I don't control state offices. I understand, I said. But I'm worried because the VIN is fine, he said evenly. If your friend took it to some shade tree mechanic who couldn't read a sticker, that's not my problem. You said it's fine, I echoed, keeping my voice small, letting silence yawn so he would fill it. He did. I have the Carfax. Clean. Single owner. I don't sell anything I wouldn't drive my wife in, okay? He laughed, conspiratorial. I do well because I take care of people. I listened to the smile press through the phone. Then I said lightly, "So you stand by the car even if corporate finds a discrepancy?" "I'm sure they won't, but if they do—" "Corporate," he said, amused. "It's my name over the door here." "And your name over the arbitration," I said, too fast. He paused. Then, friendly but edged, "Who is this again?" My throat went dry. I hung up. Cowardice and adrenaline are cousins, and both flooded my limbs. I stared at the recorder app, the shaky little line that registered sound. Proof of what? That he was glib? You can't sue glib. You can't nail arrogance to a board and call it illegal. The law is Swiss cheese. That night, I drove the Honda to my father's old garage off Madison, where the light over the workbench was still the one he'd installed years ago. I took my winter coat off and rolled up my sleeves and changed the oil myself because I needed to do something that had steps and a result. The car bled amber. It drank clean. The floor was cold concrete that seeped into my socks. When I finished and washed my hands at the utility sink, I caught my reflection in the dusty mirror. Chapped lips, a smudge on my cheekbone, eyes that had learned to be small in rooms where loud men held court. I leaned closer and said, quiet as a spell, "No more." I started mapping people like Greg. The Better Business Bureau site became evening reading. Yelp reviews, buried under glow, offered little dark blossoms. Paper tag expired 3 times. Title never arrived. Check engine light 2 weeks later. Some were cranks, sure, but patterns emerge if you let them. I made a spreadsheet. I called 3 numbers. 2 went to voicemail. 1 woman answered, harried and suspicious, until I said, "I'm not selling anything. I just want to know if your title ever came." She told me about trips to the BMV and a clerk's shrug and a dealership manager who stopped returning calls once her 30 days were up. "I called the Ohio Attorney General," she said. "They sent me a form." "Fill it out," I advised, voice steady like Mariah's. I took a day off work and drove to Columbus. It was a 4-lane ribbon slicing flat winter fields, the sky a bowl of pewter that pretended to be sky. At the consumer protection section of the AG's office, I did not storm in with a crusade. I walked up to the receptionist with a scarf tucked against a draft and asked for advice like a regular person. If a dealership is selling cars with doctored VINs and washed titles, who do people even talk to? She gave me a brochure and a tired smile and a number for an investigator named Paul. It wasn't drums and trumpets. It was a pamphlet on glossy paper. But pamphlets have seen more revolutions than speeches. Paul called me back 2 days later. His voice was good-natured, middle-aged, with a fatigue that told me he'd seen every trick already. I sent him what I had, the photographs, the purchase agreement, the cluster of similar complaints. He asked me to ask Greg to file an official complaint, which Greg did with relish. Then Paul went quiet, the way investigators go quiet when they're working. Maybe I could have let it go there. Let the state check their boxes. But humiliation wants a target, and I had one with a gold watch and a clean haircut. I kept digging, not recklessly, but with purpose. One Saturday morning in a sub-zero wind, I drove to the dealer's lot and sat across the street in the Honda like a jealous ex. The string of flags crackled. Men in puffers drifted between hoods, hands in pockets. On the edge of the property by a dumpster, a man in a beanie smoked briskly, glancing back toward the service bay. I recognized him from a Yelp photo. "Ask for Eddie, he's honest." And I stepped out of the car, my breath laddering in front of me. "Eddie?" I asked. He squinted at me. "Who's asking?" "Someone who wants to know if your boss sleeps at night," I said, trying for charm and landing closer to Farrell. He laughed. "Lady, you and me both." I told him I was thinking about buying a car. He looked at the Honda and smirked, then caught himself because maybe I was the kind of customer who would hold a grudge. "We can work with any budget," he said automatically. "What about any title?" I asked. His eyes lifted to mine. "Excuse me?" Paper tags that turn into other paper tags, I said. Vins with improv skills. He started to back away. You got to talk to management. I did, I said. He told me Columbus is slow. Eddie's cigarette burned down to a nub that he flicked hard into the snow. Columbus is only slow if you don't actually file the paperwork, he muttered, almost to himself. Why wouldn't you file? He glanced at the building. Lady, you didn't hear it from me, he said. And then the service bay door rolled up with a motor whine, and he melted into the flow of men with clipboards, leaving me with exhaust in my hair and a truth I could taste, but not yet prove. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. Dominic says you were at the lot this morning, she said without hello. Her voice cooled like steel left outdoors. I was looking at cars, I said, inflecting innocence. You don't get to go poking around his work. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm embarrassing him, I corrected, surprised at how calm I felt. My humiliation had been replaced by a mineral resolve. Elena, she said, using the tone that used to herd me into line when we were kids. He's trying to help you. He offered to get you something decent, and you repay that by, what, playing detective? I don't need his help, I said. I need him to stop selling lies. He's not, she said, and then softer, pleading. Please do not torpedo our life because you're mad we teased your car. It wasn't teasing, I said. It was contempt. You always make everything dramatic, she said, and hung up. I stared at the dead call, then at the Honda's cracked dash. The car smelled faintly of coffee and old winter. I felt the childish pull to cry and simultaneously the adult decision not to. Instead, I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter and pulled up the spreadsheet. I added 3 new names. I drafted an email to Paul with bullet points. I called Greg to tell him not to answer any calls from the dealership without routing them through Mariah first. I dialed a mechanic I trusted and asked if he'd be willing to do a neutral inspection on a car I was thinking about buying. He said yes, if I brought donuts, because that was the plan that formed then, crisp and dangerous. I would buy a car from Dominic's lot. Not a dream car, just something they swore was clean. I would let them hand me a paper tag and a promise. I would hand the car to my mechanic the same day and ask him to go hunting as if there were truffles hidden in the undercarriage. I would keep my recorder running and my questions simple. I would write down names. I would read the fine print with a magnifying glass. I would bait the trap, step in firmly, and then open my hand to show the world what bit me. And when I was done, when the law firm letters and the investigators' questions and the little chain of victims threaded their way through the Swiss cheese to a place that held, then maybe I would do something petty and huge. Maybe I would pull up next Thanksgiving in a car so gleaming it would make the chandelier look like a tea light. Maybe I would park gentle as a glove on those precious pavers. Maybe I would turn off the engine and sit for a moment, listening to the soft tick of metal cooling, the way you listen to your own heartbeat when you finally stopped running. Monday afternoon, I put on the kind of outfit Dominic would respect: wool coat, black turtleneck, boots with a heel, and drove the Honda to a car wash on Berea Road to sluice off the road salt. It was theater. I needed to stand straighter than I felt. By the time I pulled onto Lorraine Avenue, the sky was the quiet gray that makes the car lots look like stage sets, balloons bobbing, flags snapping, wind turning the metallic streamers into snakes. West Side Luxury sat between a self-storage place and a payday loan storefront, its showroom windows buffed to a shine that did the same trick as a smile with too many teeth. Inside, the smell of rubber and hot coffee, ESPN murmuring on a mounted TV, a forest of pennants strung like bunting at a parade for money. The receptionist, girl next door pretty with a manicure as glossy as the floor, looked up. "Welcome in," she sang. "Shopping today?" "I'm considering something small," I said, letting my voice be breathy, deferential, the way men like Dominic trained women to sound. "Reliable, clean, winter-friendly." She paged someone on the intercom. Eddie appeared with a grin that entered the room before the rest of him. Up close, he was younger than I'd thought. Hair gelled into a shape it probably learned from an Instagram tutorial. His name tag said Eddie in confident block letters, as if confidence could be engraved. "We got you," he said. "What do you like?" I let my gaze drift like I hadn't rehearsed this in the mirror. "Something with all-wheel drive," I said. "My commute's mostly Clifton to downtown. I'm tired of getting bullied by snow." "This way," he said, and like a good stagehand, led me to a 2013 Mercedes C300 4MATIC with a silver paint job that tried to blind you into submission. The price in the window was $12,999 in dealer handwriting that always looks casual to disguise the calculation underneath. The Carfax sat on the dash like a pressed flower under glass. "Clean," it announced with its little check marks, the printed equivalent of a wink. I reached into my purse and pressed record on the app I'd downloaded, nesting the phone in the soft cave of a knit scarf. "Looks nice," I said. "Do you mind if we pop the trunk?" He handed me the keys with a flourish. "You'll look great in this." The trunk lifted. A faint mildew smell breathed up, so subtle it could have been my imagination, but it wasn't. I knew the scent. Cleveland apartments teach you mold in a dozen dialects. The mat was clean, too clean. I bent and pushed aside the carpet to peek at the spare wheel well. It was dry, but one of the bolts had a fudge of rust that didn't match the rest. I ran a finger under the weather stripping. My fingertip came away gritty as if it had tasted silt. I kept my face still. "Test drive?" Eddie said. We hit Lorraine and turned toward West 117th. The steering made that new car promise that the road might finally be uncomplicated. The transmission shifted like it had rehearsed for opening night. I rolled down the window to listen. The smell deepened, that wet paper tang that a dryer sheet in a vent tries to drown and can't. "It's quiet," I said, as if noticing the obvious. "You guys inspect these?" "125 points," he said, proud as a scout with badges stitched all the way to his shoulder. "We don't put anything on the line without it." "And titles?" I asked. "Light. I've heard Columbus is slow." He scoffed. "We're dialed in with BMV," he said. "Worst case, you're on a temp tag for a minute. We'll get you straight." I made a mark on the pad in my purse that only I could see. When we got back to the lot, Eddie whisked us into the fluorescent embrace of an office with glass walls. Papers appeared like doves. The printer sang. He slid the Carfax over as if he were dealing me a particularly good hand and tipped his head at the highlights. One owner in Pennsylvania, routine maintenance, no accidents reported. "I'd like my mechanic to give it a once-over," I said. "Just for my peace of mind." Eddie's smile tightened. "We can't hold vehicles off the market," he said softly, a rehearsed sorrow. "I got people coming in all day. It's priced right. It won't last." "I'm not asking you to hold it," I said, meeting his eyes, letting my spine remember itself. "I'll buy it contingent on a next-day inspection. If my mechanic finds anything, you'll make it right." "That's not how it works," he said, but his voice was already reaching for a compromise because the smell of money and the scent of closing were compelling perfumes. "Tell you what, if your guy finds anything that affects safety, we'll take care of it. And if he finds evidence of flood," I asked. "Flood?" He laughed, head shaking. "Lady, come on, it's Ohio." "Exactly," I said. "It floods." Went to talk to his manager, which was theatrical code for, "I'm going to stand 10 feet away and let you sweat while I talk to a man in a blazer." The manager was Dominic. He glanced up from his phone with a smile that didn't expect to be personal. I watched him look at me like I was any other customer. I watched the moment he didn't recognize me, because men like him never bother to memorize the faces of people they've decided are small. I had to bite my tongue to keep the laugh down. He murmured to Eddie, a hand landing briefly on a shoulder, in the way bosses have learned to do when they want to be adored. We landed on $11,800 out the door, with tax and tags and a dock fee, that I flagged in my head but let pass. My down payment would be $2,000, the rest financed leftover through a credit union I'd wrangled a same-day pre-approval from. Eddie slid the arbitration agreement my way. Everything resolves privately through binding arbitration. Both parties waive the right to a jury trial, legalese pretending to be gentle. It's standard, he said. So is flipping odometers in some places, I murmured. He blinked. I smiled like I'd made a joke. I signed. The recorder app's line hiccuped and continued quietly graphing his sales patter. He produced a paper tag with an expiration date a month out and an estimate of a title arrival that sounded like a prayer. 2 to 3 weeks, tops. Columbus is catching up fast. I drove the Mercedes off the lot with my heart beating double time and the Honda sitting like a loyal dog in the far corner of the dealership, the arrangement we'd made for a generous trade-in that would be finalized once the title came through. I kept the Carfax on the passenger seat where it could stare at me like a liar. Hilliard Auto and Tire is a cinder-block temple to common sense tucked between auto glass and a barber on Hilliard Boulevard. I pulled in. The bay doors were half open like eyelids resisting the afternoon. Ricky, the mechanic I trusted since he'd told me a decade earlier not to waste money on a cabin filter I could swap myself, wiped his hands and clocked the car with the polite skepticism a doctor wears when you insist Google told you you're dying. "You finally upgraded," he said, whistling softly. "I need you to tell me if this thing ever swam," I said. I held up a white bakery box. "I come bearing donuts." He smirked. "Put those on the counter. Pop the hood." He inspected like a man reading a diary, gloved fingers gentle where gentleness mattered, tactful where the car might be hiding something fragile. He pulled floor mats and peered at the padding, unsnapped a panel beneath the dash, reached into dark crevices like he was checking pulse. The smell deepened in the warm shop air, not overwhelming, but insistent. While he worked, another tech took the donut box and left a ring of powdered sugar on the register. Ricky pulled back the trunk. Carpet, and slid his hand along the seam. His glove came back with a muddy smear. "See that?" he said, voice low. He showed me the line, faint but undeniable, a tide mark in the trunk, well a quarter-inch up from the metal. "That's not factory dust." He took a flashlight and lay on his back to look under the driver's seat, then frowned. "Seatbelt pretensioner bolts have tool marks. These should be crisp. Somebody removed them." "For what?" I asked, already knowing I was going to hate the answer. "Could be after airbags," he said. "Could be somebody cleaned mud. SRS module under here looks newer than the rest of the harness." He moved to the passenger side, popped the kick panel. "Wiring loom tape is fresh," he said, head cocked. "Different brand than the factory wrap. That's a flag." I set my jaw. "VIN sticker?" We opened the driver's door and studied the label. The font was right at a glance. The hologram dot pattern was there, but Ricky pointed to the corner. "This corner's lifting," he murmured, flicking it gently with a fingernail. The sticker peeled upward a fraction before settling back with a sigh. "A factory label doesn't do that." He walked to the dash and traced the stamped VIN at the base of the windshield with a penlight, then stepped outside and stooped at the fender, reading the VIN etched on the glass. They matched each other. Did they match the door sticker? The numbers lined up. They were just wearing different shoes. He hooked up the scanner I'd teased my OBD app with and pulled codes. An airbag module code flashed briefly like a fish surfacing and then dove. He frowned. "Somebody reset a SRS code about 7 ignition cycles ago," he said. "Not proof of anything, but in context." He opened the back seat and fed his hand along the seatbelt. "Grit," he said, and pulled out a crumb of dried mud. "Playing the buckles from sand. That I don't like." "Flood," I said, throat tightening. "I can't certify it," he said, measured. "Not without tearing more panels than you want me to. But if you were my sister, I'd tell you, this car has lived in water. Whether it was a foot in a street or a garage in a storm, I don't know. But it breathed deep." He printed photos, the little tide mark, the tool-scarred bolts, the TLC tape on the loom. like he knew a judge was the audience and a printer tray might someday be an exhibit entry. He wrote up remarks in plain English, the way techs who are tired of being lied to write. I texted the whole bundle to Mariah and emailed the scanned version to Paul. I drove the car to my father's garage, shut it inside, and called the dealership. Eddie answered, surprise filtering into cheer when he recognized my number. "How's she drive?" he asked. "Like a dream," I said, voice pleasant and gelid, with a little river under the pillow. Silence. Then, professional bright. "I'm sorry?" "My mechanic found waterline in the trunk well," I said. "Tool marks on the pretensioners, non-factory tape on the wiring loom, and recent SRS module resets. That's not a 125-point inspection. That's a 125-point prayer." "Ma'am, I don't appreciate—" "I'm giving you a chance to fix it, Eddie," I said evenly. "You told me if anything affected safety, you'd make it right. This affects safety. The arbitration clause can wait. I want the car unwound today." "You signed as is," he said, a little less smooth, because scripts stutter when you hit them with facts. "Fraud unwinds as is," I said. "Put Dominic on." "I don't know if he's—" "Eddie," I said. "I was at Thanksgiving dinner." He connected me. Dominic came on like a man who had been interrupted trimming a tie. "Elena," he said, and his mouth curled around my name like it was a lemon he could swallow to impress the room. "Buying a Mercedes without telling the family? Bold." "You sold me a flooded car," I said, and felt my blood settle into a cold, deliberate flow. "You're going to unwind it. You're going to hand my Honda's keys back. You're going to apologize." He chuckled. "Slow down. First, we don't buy flood cars. I've been in this business 15 years. Second, if you had concerns, you should have had one of our guys look—" "I did. He gave me a donut," I said. He ignored it. "Your mechanic's wrong, or making a mountain. We'll bring it back, detail it, replace a belt. You'll be fine." "I'm not asking you," I said. "I'm telling you where I'm headed. The Ohio AG has my complaint on his desk. Our firm has a file with your Carfax printouts and photographs. This is me giving you a courtesy call before the sound gets bigger." He let a beat stretch. "Return it," he said at last, voice bored, as if swatting a fly. "We'll inspect. No promises. No unwinds. We'll do what's right." "You mean what's cheapest?" I said. "You mean what you can get away with?" "Elena," he said softly, adopting the tone men use when they want to make your fear a private joke. "Don't let your Honda pride make you reckless. You want to play with paperwork? I can make paperwork my hobby." "Good," I said. "Then we both have something to do while the AG asks questions." "See you at Christmas," he said, amused, and hung up. I sat in the quiet of the garage and felt my hands shake the way they do after you've held perfectly still for too long. I inhaled the two smells that had built the last decade of my life: oil and cold. I texted Vanessa, "Your husband sold me a flood car. I'm giving him a chance to unwind." Her reply came 8 minutes later, which is the time it takes to rehearse a sentence that feels like love while holding a grenade. "You can't do this to us." To us. I set the phone down. I poured myself water. I forced food, half an apple, down. I printed Ricky's photos and stapled them to his notes, because a good staple at the right angle can make you feel like a general before battle. I drove the Mercedes back to the dealership that evening, the light fading into that laundry-smudged dusk Cleveland does in winter, where the world looks like it has been wrung out and hung to dry. Eddie met me with a form for a courtesy overnight evaluation. He didn't look me in the eye. Dominic wasn't visible. I left the car. I asked for a receipt. I went back to my Honda like a dog returns to its field, ready to run again because running is honest. I locked the Honda like it might be asked to defend me. At home, I wrote everything down the way Mariah had taught me. Dates, times, quotes cataloged to the minute. I emailed Paul again, subject line, update, vehicle surrendered for evaluation. I showered until my skin didn't know the difference between hot and cold. I put the phone face down on the nightstand so I wouldn't watch it refusing to ring. It rang at 2:13 a.m. At first, I thought it was the smoke alarm chirp you can only hear in dreams. Then I realized my iPhone was buzzing with an alert I'd never seen before. An unknown AirTag is moving with you. It blazed white across the black. My mouth went dry. I tapped. The screen showed a little dot moving on an outline of my neighborhood. The alert said, helpfully practical, "This item has been moving with you for some time." It offered to play a sound. I hit play. From my living room under the couch, something began to chirp like a bird in a tin cage. The chirp under the couch was steady and maddening, a metallic bird trapped in wool. I yanked the cushions aside, kneeling on the rug like I was praying, and there it was, a white disc smudged with a thumbprint, stuck to a sliver of 3M tape barely hanging on. For a second, the world narrowed to that little circle. Then everything widened so fast, my stomach flipped. My front door, my windows, the seam at the baseboard, the way the hallway light reached into the room and stopped at the couch like it refused to get involved. I hit pause on the alert. The chirp died. The silence after was its own sound. I used tongs from the kitchen to pluck the AirTag into a Ziploc bag because some old TV show had taught me that fingerprints matter even when everyone says they won't. I set the bag on the counter like a science experiment I hated and called non-emergency. The dispatcher sounded bored until I said the word tracking. Then I had 2 Lakewood officers at my door in 10 minutes, boots like polite thunder on the stairs. They were young, cheeks raw from cold and awake at 2 a.m. One took the bag with a gloved hand. The other walked the perimeter of my small apartment with a flashlight he didn't really need, shining it into corners like he was teaching the dark to sit. Any ex-boyfriends likely to do something? Like this? He asked gently. Only men I can think of are married to my sister and sell flood cars, I said, and watched his eyebrows climb. He wrote it down anyway because cops have to live inside everyone's strangest sentences. "We'll log it," he said. "Apple says after a while the tag will play a sound automatically to warn you. That's likely what happened. If you get more alerts, call us. If you see anyone hanging around, call us. If you think you're being followed, call us." I asked if I could hear the tag's serial number. He read it out and I wrote it next to the time in my notebook, my handwriting suddenly neat as elementary school. "They can register to a phone," the officer said, eyes on my face. "Doesn't mean it's registered to the guy you think it is. Could be a third party, but we take it seriously." When they left, I stood at the window and watched their taillights smear down the street. The apartment felt like it had been breathed in by someone else. I moved through the rooms, turning on lights like checkpoints. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, the old office I'd made into a closet. On the coffee table lay the dealership's glossy folder, West Side Luxury embossed in silver, bulging with purchase paperwork I'd photocopied and highlighted. It was an obscene object now, as if it had undone me merely by sitting there. My eyes landed on a rectangle of Velcro peeled back inside the folder's spine. The adhesive square on the AirTag matched it perfectly. Someone had tucked the tag into the folder at the dealership like you tuck a mint into a pillow, then at some point shuffled, thumbing pages at the kitchen table. I must have knocked it loose. It had skittered under the couch and chirped when Apple decided I'd had enough time to be ignorant. I took a photo of the spine, the Velcro, the bagged tag. I wrote another email to Paul. I copied Mariah. I titled it, "Tracker Found in Dealer Folder, Police Report, Nerd." I attached the photo and the serial. On second thought, I attached a photo of my face too, red-eyed and furious, because stories move faster when they have a person to drag behind them. I slept with the hallway light on like a child. The light didn't care. It just did what lights do. It tried. The next morning, the first thing I did was drive to work the long way, eyes on my mirror. The Honda sounded louder after midnight fear, every rattle a narrative about how easily metal loses, how easily bodies do. I parked in the garage on West 3rd and hurried into the elevator like a civilian ducking artillery. When I pushed open the firm's glass door, Mariah was already there,
coat still on, hair braided back like she was expecting weather indoors. She listened to me like a metronome, steady, then said, "We escalate." Paul replied an hour later with a sprint of professionalism that read like a hand on my shoulder. He'd looped in an investigator with the BMV dealer licensing section.
He'd asked me to bring the AirTag to the AG satellite office downtown. He wrote, "Do not return to the dealership. Do not contact them again. We believe your safety is at risk." The phone rang at noon. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, the receptionist popped her head in to say there was a man in the lobby who said he needed to see me. "Said it's urgent," she tried to whisper evenly. "Said you've had your fun." Mariah was already standing by the time I reached the door. "Don't," she said, hand at my elbow. "I'll go." It wasn't Dominic. It was a third-party tow operator in a Chicago Bears beanie and a jacket with a garbage company logo. He reeked of cold and impatience. "Which one is hers?" he asked the receptionist, scanning the hallway behind her like he expected me to materialize and fight him with my mouth. "I got a work order." "What lot?" Mariah asked, total lawyer now, crisp as paper. "What vehicle? What work order number?" He fished a crumpled carbon copy from a pocket. The dealership's name sat there like someone had stamped it into a bruise. The vehicle description was my Honda and not my Honda. Correct VIN, wrong color. The lot was our building. He'd been circling the block because he couldn't find green in a fleet of black sedans and lawyerly compacts. "You can't repossess a car without due process," Mariah said, calm. "And not from a private garage without the garage's permission." "I'm just the driver," he said defensively. "Guy said they own the note." "My car is paid off," I said, the kind of statement that should be boring and wasn't anymore. "There is no note." He weighed the carbon copy like it might instruct him more if he smoothed it enough. "You want me to call the guy?" "Please do," Mariah said. He dialed on speaker. A voice answered too fast, oily as gear grease. It wasn't Dominic. It was someone who worked for someone like him. "You at the building?" the voice asked. "Grab it and go." "Lady says the car's paid," the driver said, "and she's in a garage. She's got a lawyer." There was a pause long enough to be dangerous. Then the voice said, lazy with contempt, "It's not about the car. It's about manners." The driver snapped the phone shut, eyes sliding to mine with an apology his paycheck wouldn't allow him to say. "I'm not touching it," he muttered. He put his hands up like he'd wandered into a fight at a family reunion and found out the names too late. He left without meeting my eye again, boots scuffing a floor that didn't belong to him. We logged the attempt. We gave Paul the carbon copy number. He sent a reply that tasted like the air before a storm. "Thank you. Do not deviate from your routine. We're almost there." I walked to the window and watched the brittle sun crack over the Justice Center's concrete face. The Honda sat in its garage like a good dog behind a fence. I put my palm flat on the glass and thought, I'm done being polite. I'm done being the punchline said with a smile. That night, I slept with the AirTag bag on my nightstand like a relic and the baseball bat my father kept in the garage against the wall. I woke to nothing but the ordinary cold. The ordinary cold felt like mercy. I called Greg on my drive in. "They tried to take my car," I told him. He exhaled hard. "They called my boss yesterday," he said. "Told him I was causing trouble and maybe he should check whether I was looking up stuff on company time. My boss said, 'Greg's performance reviews are spotless,' and hung up. Then he pulled me into his office and said whatever I was doing, keep doing it, but do it off the clock." "People are decent," I said, surprised at my own surprise. "Some are," he said, and sounded like he might cry, which made me have to swallow 3 times. Around 4, my phone lit with a message from Paul that was only a time and a place. "Tomorrow, 7:30 a.m., across from the lot. Do not approach. Observe." I read it twice, 3 times. I deleted it in case anyone ever got hold of my phone. I memorized the way the numbers looked. At dawn, I parked across Lorraine from West Side Luxury. The sky was wet concrete. Steam lifted from manholes like the city was practicing magic. The flag strung across the lot didn't move. It was one of those winter mornings that has given up. I sipped gas station coffee and felt my heart hammer as a dark SUV I didn't recognize rolled in slow at the corner. Then two more. They didn't have sirens. They had intention. A fourth vehicle with a utility trailer turned into the driveway like it had Googled it. A van with no markings pulled in slow enough to be careful. I recognized the posture of enforcement, the way people get out of cars like they're stepping into a movie in which everyone survives if they do the scene clean. I saw Eddie first, hoodie up under a puffer, sprint out the showroom door and stop with his palms up, a pantomime of innocence learned from 100 viral videos. A man in a government parka spoke to him with a hand loose at his hip, palm visible. People forget. The state is not a shout. It's a set of forms and a laminated badge. The garage bay doors opened like eyelids. I saw a figure I knew to be Dominic, because the swagger lived in the posture even at 30 yards. He came out with his hands up, but his chin down, which is how men like him apologize without giving you anything you can take to the bank. They corralled him not with handcuffs, but with a circle of attention. Someone with a clipboard walked along the front row of cars and peeled up a door sticker with a small tool, as tender as you lift a child's bandage. He held the corner up to the light so a second man with a camera could photograph the glue strings like spider webs spun in the wrong season. On the far edge of the lot, two techs crawled under an Audi's chassis with flashlights, voices muffled but urgent. My phone buzzed. Vanessa. I stared at her name until it stopped. It buzzed again. I closed my eyes and let it. The only thing louder than humiliation is vindication, and both will drown you if you don't learn to breathe through them. 2 hours later, Cleveland news vans arrived like birds late for migration, dishes lifting toward a sky that didn't want to carry them. I watched a reporter in a blue parka lip-sync outrage at a cameraman who nodded like he'd seen this a dozen times and would see it a dozen more. I thought about the AG interviewing a dozen people whose names I now knew. I thought about my father's garage, the way the light over the bench always hummed before it warmed. I thought about Thanksgiving and the way the carving knife had caught the chandelier and turned my face into a bright, brittle mask. I thought, very calmly, I will park on those pavers again. My phone lit one more time and I answered because avoidance is its own humiliation. They're at my house, Vanessa blurted, voice wrecked. Search warrant. They took Dominic's laptop. They took our files. Elena, you have to tell them he's a good person. He put a tracker in my apartment, I said. He tried to take my car. He sold a flood vehicle to a woman with twins. He's not a good person. He's my husband, she said, a truth she thought trumped every other one. What am I supposed to do? Tell the truth, I said, and get a lawyer who only loves the truth. There was a sound on her end like someone had set a glass down too hard. You did this, she said, and then the line went dead, which felt appropriate. Sometimes the story ends in a silence you can't argue with, and sometimes it's not the end at all. Just the pause where you learn how to stand in new weather before the next season arrives. I sat in the Honda until my coffee went cold, watching the flags, waiting for the wind to remember them. I did not go to the lot. I did not approach. I just watched until a flatbed rolled out with 2 cars strapped down whose VINs would be checked by a man with a lanyard and a patience that could level a forest. Then I drove to work and wrote it all down in a way that would make sense to a judge, to a journalist, and to the part of me that would wake at 2:13 a.m. for the rest of her life and listen for a chirp in the dark, waiting to see if the world was trying to move closer again. The next week unraveled like a cardigan, one loop and suddenly cloth. Eddie called me from a number I didn't recognize and asked to meet somewhere, not on Lorraine, not on Detroit, and not where anybody knows my car. We chose Gypsy on a Tuesday, when the tables were full of laptops and people writing novels at noon. He looked smaller out of uniform. Without the name tag and the lot behind him, he was just a man with bad sleep and a jacket that had learned his slump. I'm not doing this for you, he said, fingers around a paper cup he didn't drink from. I'm doing it because I have a kid, and Dominic doesn't know her name. Okay, I said softly. Tell me what I already know so the people with badges can prove it. He exhaled. We buy cars at auction. Some come from Jersey, some from Pennsylvania. A lot from down south after storms. Not all are bad, some are fine. But there's always a guy, who sells us clean paperwork for cars that shouldn't be clean. Different counties, titles that go white as snow after a rinse cycle. Service techs swap the SRS modules. We dry out the trunks. We swap door stickers. We order new glass with the right VIN etched in. Carfax only knows what gets reported, and we don't report unless we have to. And the AirTag? I asked. His eyes cut to mine, guilty and defensive at once. That was not me, he said. That was Dominic. He says, if she's going to play lawyer, I'm going to play cop. He thinks he's funny. He's not. And the tow order? I asked. His buddy? He said. Dominic called it a courtesy, said you'd get the message, said it would make you realize who has hands on your life. I set my cup down carefully, like the table was the only steady thing in the room, and I didn't want to offend it. Can you prove any of it? I asked. He slid a thumb drive across the table in a small, embarrassed movement. I took pictures of the whiteboard in the back when nobody was around, he said. VINs, stock numbers, sticker orders, texts. He sent me one that said, "Put the Ohio face on it." I think he thought that was a joke. It wasn't. I put the drive in my purse like it was a live wire and left $5 under my cup because I could not bear to walk out and leave less than something behind. Eddie watched me go with a face that had decided to be brave and would not remember how later. I sent the drive to Paul by courier. I copied Mariah. I waited. 2 days later, the AG's office held a press conference on the steps of a building with more columns than useful windows. They didn't say Dominic's name until they did. They said pattern of deceptive practices. They said title fraud. They said tampering with records and criminal simulation. And when a reporter asked a question with "as is" in it, the deputy AG said, "As is isn't a license to commit a crime." I watched it streamed on my phone in the law firm break room between microwaves and a jar of plastic forks. Someone I barely knew patted my back and said, "Good," and meant it. I texted Greg. He texted back a photo of his twins holding a sign that said, "Thank you," in marker with too many hearts. I put my forehead on my forearm and cried a silent minute in a room that had seen lawyers pick spinach from their teeth and clients lose jobs on speakerphone and could absorb one more thing. The sign at the dealership came down 2 weeks later. Not the metal posts, those take permits. The vinyl banner, the one that shouted a dozen lies at a car-riddled sky, went first. A man in a cherry picker zipped the ties and let the banner sag and fold like a loud shirt finally shut in a drawer. I didn't go. I watched it on the news like a normal person who hopes that extracting venom is the same thing as healing. It isn't, but it helps. Vanessa moved in with our mother, a fact I learned because my mother called to ask if I could carry boxes. I carried boxes. Vanessa wouldn't meet my eyes, which felt like watching an eclipse of a sun you worked hard to uncover. Dominic turned himself in with a lawyer whose pocket square deserved its own line on the docket. He posted bond. He ignored reporters with the same polite contempt he'd used on me. The internet wrote its version, full of elbows and wrong flowers. People commented the way people do, certain and cruel and sometimes kind. The case rolled on. The wheels of justice are stodgy and old, and they crush like time. I kept going to work. I kept going to my night class. The Honda drove and drank and sang its cheap, honest songs. The AG sent updates to victims with bullet points and bulletproof language. My name sat at the bottom like a footnote to a thing I had decided would not own me. One Tuesday, Howard, the senior partner with a house in Shaker Heights and a handshake that felt like wood, called me into his office and shut the door with a softness I had learned meant kindness. "We're making you case coordinator," he said, smiling slightly at my shock. "You've been doing the work already. You're good at it. Also, the Christmas party is at Cleveland Botanical Garden this year. I'm going to need you to run point like it's court. Can you do that? Yes, I said, and felt something inside my chest stand up after years of sitting politely. And, he said, like an afterthought he'd been waiting to reveal, my wife is going to Boston to see her sister Thanksgiving week, which leaves me with a 2020 Bentley flying spur that will otherwise sit under a tarp. My children are grown. They will not be impressed. I, however, would be very impressed if you borrowed it and parked it on any family driveway you wished. I stared at him, at the photographs of his kids he kept, turned toward the desk rather than the visitor. I can't. You can, he said, amused. Consider it a company car for one day. Consider it therapy. I laughed then, a real sound that made the window shiver its own small laugh back at me. I'll bring it back full, I said, because some people are good, and you honor that with gas. The week before Thanksgiving, the plea deal slid into existence like a door you thought was a wall. Dominic pled to a handful of charges that did not scratch the itch in my bones, but scratched. Something on paper that let victims sleep. Restitution funds would be set up. He would pay fines. He would not sell cars again. He would have a record that would read like a mirror he couldn't break. When the hearing let victims speak, Greg went. So did a dozen others. I did not. I wrote a statement and let Mariah read it because sometimes power is staying home. I sat at my kitchen table and watched sunlight find dust. I put my hand on the table and kept it there until my fisted heart loosened. Thanksgiving morning dawned so clean it felt like the world had been rinsed. The sky over Lakewood was pale and shameless. I put on a black dress and a camel coat and earrings my father had given me that made me think of dimes. Howard pulled into my lot at 9 in a car that could make a priest wicked. It was gray that looked like aluminum if aluminum had been taught manners. The leather inside was the color of expensive toast. He handed me the key fob like it weighed less than my humiliation, which is to say, it was light. Bring it back with stories, he said. I drove through the city like a new language had been installed under my foot. People looked. You can feel the gaze of strangers, the way you can feel winter through glass. The Bentley didn't growl. It hummed a boundary around me, a bubble of engineered peace. When I turned onto the boulevard toward Westlake, I thought of that first night after Thanksgiving last year, the wind pushing the Honda sideways, the lake a black slab that didn't care if I stayed. I thought of myself gripping the wheel with the kind of determination your body scares you with. I thought about the chirp in the night. I thought very calmly, I can leave now whenever I want. At Vanessa's cul-de-sac, children in glitter shoes wobbled on scooters, and men in vests eyed the grill like it owed them an apology. The pavers gleamed like teeth. I rolled in slow. I parked straight. I turned off the engine, and the silence after was not silence. It was a measured applause only I could hear. I sat for a second, looking at my hands on a wheel that had been made to make hands forget cheap plastic existed. Then I stepped out and shut the door gently because dignity is quiet. The great room hush that happens when money enters a conversation unannounced happened when I walked through the foyer, a hush I had heard last year, but for different reasons. My mother's mouth made an O, and then a smile she couldn't undo. My aunt put a hand to her chest because she is that kind of aunt, and always will be. A cousin whispered, "Oh my God," like a prayer. Vanessa appeared at the far end of the room, hair pulled back without a blowout, face clean of the gloss she used to wear over sadness. Her eyes swept me and landed not on the car, but on my face. It felt right. "You look good," she said softly, as if she were speaking over a baby sleeping. "You too," I said, meaning it. Dominic wasn't there. His absence sat at the table. Like a place setting you don't clear because someone still has to eat. His chair at the head was empty. His cufflink box sat on the mantel like a relic no one had figured out what to do with yet. His shadow hung on the kitchen tile where he had stood last year and performed a joke that a court had turned into paperwork. I didn't miss him. He was just part of the room, like a stain you can't remove, so you learn to place a rug. Someone asked me, breathless, what I drove. I let them go outside and see for themselves. I stood at the window and watched the cul-de-sac gather, neighbors, cousins, children. The car looked ridiculous and perfect in front of Vanessa's house. It looked like an apology a man who was sorry would have bought and then not driven. I expected joy. What I felt was something better. Balance. At dinner, my mother asked me to say grace. It was a kindness I wasn't sure I could carry. I cleared my throat and felt my father's mug in my palm, even though my hand was empty. Thank you for safe cars and honest mechanics, I said. Thank you for donuts in cold garages and for people who do their jobs with their backs straight. Thank you for hard lessons learned without anyone dying. Thank you for pavers that hold weight. Thank you for sisters who answer the door anyway. Amen, my mother said firmly, and the room breathed again. We ate. We told stories. We did the words that make a holiday feel like a story you tell the year after. At dessert, Vanessa found me in the laundry room because that's where women go when the house needs them to think. I'm sorry, she said, simple as a clean plate. Me too, I said. We stood facing the washer like it might translate our grief. He shouldn't have been able to do it, she said, and the way she said it told me she had finally allowed the possibility that his charm and her love had both been used as tools. I thought if I made the house perfect, I could make the man inside it good. You can't, I said, and watched the truth land. It didn't break her. It set her down. We walked back into the bright house. I picked up my coat. I didn't make a speech because speeches are for people who don't have the car keys yet. I hugged my mother. I hugged my aunt, who whispered something about lemon bars I promised to take. I hugged Vanessa, and neither of us pretended we weren't crying. I said goodbye to the cousins who had laughed last year and watched them look at me like they'd seen a trick and weren't sure the magician should be invited back. I stepped out into cold that felt like a new idea of itself. On the driveway, I paused. The Bentley sat where I had put it, as obedient as an animal you'd be foolish to trust. I bent and touched one of the pavers, fingertips on stone that had been my stage and my execution. It was cold, and it was just a brick. I stood, smoothed my coat, and slid behind the wheel. When I started the car, the cabin filled with a low, useful silence. I watched the rear camera show me the black rectangle of oil that wasn't there because I don't leak. I turned the wheel. I left the semicircle without touching a blade of grass. At the end of the street, I stopped and took one long look through the windshield I didn't owe anyone for. On Detroit Avenue, the lake showed off. I drove past Gypsy, past the BMV office whose clerks had become reluctant saints, past the warehouse where the AG had probably boxed up a dozen lies and stored them like winter coats. I turned onto Madison and let the car nose toward my father's garage. I turned the light over the workbench on, even though I didn't need it. I stood in that humming yellow and reached out to touch the Honda. Its hood was dusty. It was warm where the day's sun had reached it through the window seam. I pressed my palm flat and felt its small heat answer back. In the weeks after, I returned the Bentley with the tank full and a tin of cookies on the passenger seat because some debts should rest in sugar. I kept my promotion. I finished my class with a grade that made me want to call my father and leave a message on a number that doesn't exist. I sold the Honda to a high school kid from Parma who came with his mother and a hope I recognized. I told him every rattle and what it meant. I printed the Vine history, clean and boring, like the most beautiful poem I've ever read. I cried after I handed him the keys, and then I laughed, and then I went to a reputable dealer. Cleveland Motorsports was fun but too loud, and bought a certified Acura TLX because adulthood isn't about revenge. It's about trailing steady light behind you where you can. Sometimes I still wake at 2:13. I lie in the apartment listening for a chirp. It doesn't come. It doesn't matter. The memory is a dog that will bark at leaves for a while. I get up. I make tea. I stand by the window and watch my car under the streetlight pretend to be any other person's car. The street is quiet. The city breathes. Somewhere, a set of pavers waits for someone desperate to keep values up in the neighborhood. Somewhere, a woman is looking at a folder that emboldens paper. Somewhere, a joke is about to be told, and somebody is going to choose whether to laugh or to leave. This was a real thing that happened. I tell it the way I remember it, because memory is the closest thing we have to justice when the law is busy. If you were at that table last year, you remember the crystal leaves and the carving knife and the way the laughter pressed me thin. If you drove Lorraine last month, you remember the flags and the men in parkas and the way a sign can come down like a curtain when the show is over. If you stood on my sister's steps today, you remember the way the cold made you honest. If you ever parked a car on someone else's worth and felt small, this is yours too. On some nights, when the city's hum feels like a car settling after a long Drive. I roll the window down just an inch and listen to the engine tick as it cools. It's an intimate sound, like the world agreeing with you in sentences you can't repeat. I used to think it was the sound of things breaking. Now I know it's the sound of something finished, heat folding its hands, metal remembering where it belongs. The end.